The scale and scope of Operation Overlord was unprecedented. The numbers of men, vehicles, and supplies coming across the shore in the first few months of the assault are staggering. But what is more impressive is that much of this movement was done over the shore without use of a fixed port. Within 48 hours of the amphibious assault, over 130,000 GIs and some 17,000 vehicles came ashore. With more troops and equipment arriving daily, the amount of supplies required to support this force grew exponentially. By D+4, the force required 6,000 tons of supplies per day, 9,000 by D+10, and over 12,000 by D+16. Over the next 2 months, the number of troops ashore grew to 1.2 million Americans, along with 250,000 vehicles and over 5 million tons of supplies and equipment. At the strategic and operational levels of war, throughput of men and material into a theater of war are key for success. Movement of divisions, corps, and even whole armies is a logistically intensive endeavor, requiring deliberate planning and skillful execution. Such operations usually require an established deep water port with gantry cranes, numerous berthing spaces, quays, large staging areas, and a connection to a fairly robust transportation network. For military strategists, securing such locations and capabilities are key objectives in any campaign. Harbor facilities were key objectives for the November 1942 Operation Torch landings in North Africa. All 3 U.S. landings focused on securing ports for the introduction of men, materials, and vehicles. However, starting with Operation Husky in Sicily in July 1943, the Americans developed a new concept in modern expeditionary operations. As the U.S. 7th Army landed at the towns of Licata, Gela, and Skogliti, none of these locations had a robust port facility capable of supporting large military organizations. The American part of the Sicily invasion initially involved 3 divisions supported solely by sea-based platforms. In a new application of power projection, U.S. forces provided logistical support over an unprepared beach with little infrastructure. To accomplish this task, the U.S. Army and Navy began using a host of new vessels to build combat power ashore: the Landing Ship Tank, LST, Landing Craft Tank, LCT, and the DUKW, pronounced DUK, amphibious truck. These 3 platforms were employed in large numbers providing logistics over the shore during the Sicily campaign. Of these 3 vessels, the LST was of primary importance and a key component of this new method of supply. The basic U.S. design was first floated in October 1942 with initial use during the Torch invasion. Displacing some 4,000 tons, the craft could carry approximately 100 troops, 16 to 19 tons of equipment, and 6 to 9 landing craft with a range of over 9,000 miles. The largest beaching vessel of the war, the LST, could come ashore, ground itself on the shoreline, and then open its hull's clamshell doors to discharge tanks or vehicles off a bow ramp. Drafting only 8 to 14 feet, the vessel was slow and traveled at just 10 knots. Despite being derisively referred to by its crews as a large, slow target, these ships were worth their weight in gold, and the number available was a key planning consideration for every U.S. amphibious assault of the war. Assisting in the delivery of men and equipment from ship to shore was the LCT. This vessel was the largest open-deck amphibious craft and included a bow ramp for easy debarkation of wheeled or tracked vehicles. Displacing some 300 tons, it could carry 150 tons of cargo at a top speed of 8 to 10 knots. With over 2,000 built, LCTs were often placed in initial assault waves carrying tanks or self-propelled artillery. An inherently flexible design, these vessels were also used as fire support platforms, utility craft, minesweepers, and in salvage operations. Perhaps the most flexible platform was the 2.5-ton amphibious truck referred to as the DUKW. This Army design included a 6-wheeled truck chassis contained within a hull-shaped body that included a propeller screw and a rudder. The vehicle could swim with 5,000 pounds of cargo at a speed of 5 knots. However, once ashore, the DUKW could easily travel inland at speeds up to 45 miles per hour. For the Overlord invasion, Allied planners envisioned using the large, robust seaport at Cherbourg at the tip of France's Cotentin Peninsula. Capable of supporting between 26 and 30 divisions, The harbor was a key objective following the initial amphibious assault, with a planned liberation date of D+14. However, the city and its port were not secured until the end of June, on D+24. Even with its capture, retreating German troops destroyed much of the harbor's infrastructure, damaging the quays, demolishing the cranes, blocking the port entrance with sunken vessels, cratering the breakwater, and destroying the electrical control and heating plants. The Germans did such a thorough job of spiking the harbor that the American engineer charged with its rehabilitation reported that the demolition of the port of Cherbourg is a masterful job, beyond a doubt the most complete, intensive, and best-planned demolition in history. The German officer responsible, Admiral Walker Hennecke, was awarded the Knight's Cross for his efforts. As a result, this important link in the Allied offensive remained unusable until at least mid-August. The design was often employed bringing smaller artillery pieces and ammunition to shore and in support of retail distribution operations. However, overlord planners at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, foresaw the requirement for an interim capability until Cherbourg was fully operational. At the 1943 Quebec Conference, British Commodore John Hughes Hallett recognized the need, if we can't capture a port, we must take one with us. With backing from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the Allies developed artificial harbors that included piers, causeways, and breakwaters. Known as Mulberries, these man-made harbors included a host of breakwaters with colorful names such as bombards, corncobs, phoenixes, and gooseberries. Inside the harbors were the British-designed Lobnitz piers, which served as sea-based berths for naval vessels. These piers could offload deep-draft vessels as well as littoral craft such as LSTs and LCTs. Accompanying the piers were whale road sections that created a causeway to the shore. With this design, wheeled vehicles could roll on and roll off of transports, cutting down debarkation times. While the Americans remained skeptical of the effort, construction of Mulberries began as early as D+3. Two were planned, with Mulberry A located in the U.S. sector at Omaha Beach and Mulberry B at Arromanches at Gold Beach in the British sector. Once built, Mulberry offloading operations began on June 16. Initial operations were promising as offload times dwindled from previous over-the-shore methods employed by the Americans during operations in the Mediterranean. Unload times for LSTs and larger vessels dropped from 12 hours to less than 2. Furthermore, larger amphibious craft did not have to wait for the tide to come in for a beached vessel to leave the beach for another mission. Before the Mulberries were in place, Allied forces were already operating in a deficit. The planned figures for men and equipment moving ashore fell short of expectations. The original Overlord plan called for the landing of over 22,000 troops that first week, but in the next 7 days, only 17,000 arrived. Similarly, of the 12,000 tons of supplies requested, only 9,000 came ashore. The same applied to vehicles, with only 2,600 arriving out of the 4,000 scheduled. By June 18, total discharge rates stood at about 72% of the planned requirement. Combat power was only slowly developing. To make matters worse for the Allies, on June 19 to 21 a severe storm battered the man-made structures. While Mulberry B was installed in a protective cove within the British sector and remained mostly intact, its American counterpart did not fare nearly as well. Mulberry A's bombards were torn from their moorings along with its phoenixes, causing waves to bash the pierheads and eventually separate from their whale causeways. Additionally, smaller vessels and other parts of the structure were also tossed about with the entire synthetic harbor irreparable. Declared unrecoverable, parts from the American structure were then cannibalized for repair on the remaining Mulberry. Given the storm's fury, the speed of the landing throughput was reduced by 60%. With the loss of the American Mulberry and unavailability of Cherbourg, U.S. forces had to rely on the previously proven over-the-shore methodologies. After the storm, 1,500 soldiers were dispatched to clear Omaha Beach to resume offload operations as soon as possible. Every available LST, LCT, and DUKW was pulled into this effort, clearing out landing craft, rhino ferries, pontoons, and other wrecked equipment. With the storms passing, the U.S. logistics effort resumed fully on June 23. However, much to the logistician's surprise, both American landing beaches surpassed their previous discharge rates, with Utah moving 6,400 tons and Omaha 10,000 tons. Just over a week after the storm, both beaches handled over 161,000 tons of supplies, and by end of the month, totals reached 298,827 tons. Prior to the storm on D+12, the combined discharge rate at the two beaches was approximately 14,600 tons. After the storm and during the last week of June, Omaha processed 13,500 tons per day, 115% of its planned tonnage capacity, and Utah averaged 7,000 tons per day, or 124% of planned capacity. Operation Overlord was indeed an allied effort to leverage the men, machines, and capabilities of the United Nations. Sustaining the beachhead and enabling subsequent operations ashore required a robust logistics effort both ashore and afloat. However, the complex plans of using a man-made harbor in the American sector were dashed by Mother Nature. Combined with a stubborn German defense of Cherbourg and an efficient spiking of the seaport, building the first U.S. Army's combat power ashore was much more difficult than anticipated. However, American formations could rely on the proven logistics over-the-shore methods that were developed during previous amphibious assaults. While this method fell short of the envisioned requirement, it provided enough men, material, and equipment to ensure that the Allies had sufficient combat power to defeat the Germans.